As you can see from the finalized Q3 reports, our growth exceeded all expectations by 40%.
Look at that, it's stabilized. It actually worked.
We did it! The inhibitors are synthesizing.
As you can see, the Q3 projections have not just been met, they've been exceeded by 50%.
I told you there would be consequences. Now it's time to pay.
Have mercy. I beg you.
These projections don't just exceed expectations, they rewrite the playbook entirely.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How did you manage this in a single quarter?
The sound of car doors slamming behind her echoed down the empty street as Brianna stood outside the hospital entrance. The sterile fluorescent light of the emergency room lobby flickered above her head, casting a sickly green glow across the tile floor. Her hands trembled as she clutched the stack of paperwork, her heart pounding in her chest. She had just come from a job interview. After weeks of searching for anything that would allow her to escape the daily grind, it felt like the glimmer of hope she'd been waiting for. But as she reached into her purse for her phone, a sharp pain shot through her lower back. Her breath hitched, panic crawling up her spine. She made her way toward the check-in desk, desperate, but the receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. A cold, disinterested voice finally pierced the air. "We're not taking walk-ins right now," she muttered, her eyes never leaving computer. Brianna's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I'm in pain," Brianna whispered, voice cracking. The receptionist gave a sharp sigh, still not glancing up. "I don't make the rules. Come back later, or go somewhere else." Brianna felt the weight of that dismissal, her skin burning with the knowledge of what was happening. She wanted to scream, to demand to be treated like any other person. But instead, she only nodded, her knees weak as she stumbled backward. As she turned to leave, a voice called out behind her, "Don't bother. They're just going to ignore you too." Brianna froze. The words stung more than the pain in her body. She turned her head slowly, meeting the eyes of a woman seated in the corner, her expression filled with quiet fury. Brianna swallowed hard, knowing that what came next would change everything. Brianna stood in the sterile light of the emergency room, clutching the stack of papers in her hand, the weight of them pressing down on her chest as if they were made of stone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum distant and muffled by the rush of blood pounding in her ears. Her back ached, each breath sharp and shallow, but the pain was nothing compared to the gnawing fear that had taken root in her stomach. She stepped up to the check-in desk, her eyes searching for the receptionist. The woman was staring at a computer screen, typing away without a care in the world. Brianna hesitated before speaking, her voice small, almost unsure. "Excuse me, I need help." The receptionist didn't look up. "We're not taking walk-ins right now," she said, her tone flat and indifferent. Brianna blinked, the words sinking in. I'm in pain," she said, trying to hold back the tremor in her voice. The receptionist finally looked up, her eyes scanning Brianna with a quick, dismissive glance. "I don't make the rules. Come back later, or go somewhere else." She turned back to her screen, as if the conversation was already over. Brianna's heart sank, the cold weight of that dismissal sinking deep in the pain in her back. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Her hands shook, and she stumbled back, her legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. She turned to leave, but a voice in the corner of the room stopped her. "Don't bother," the voice said, sharp and cutting. "They're just going to ignore you too." Brianna froze, the words striking her like a punch. She slowly turned toward the source of the voice, a woman sitting in the far corner of the waiting room, her eyes filled with quiet fury. Brianna's stomach twisted. She recognized the truth in the woman's words, felt the sting of them in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't just about her back. This was about something deeper, something that had been boiling beneath the surface for far too long. The woman looked at her with a steady gaze. "You're not the first," she said quietly, her voice steady. "And you won't be the last." Brianna swallowed hard, her body trembling. She nodded once, her fists clenched tight at her sides. There was no turning back now. The fight had already begun. Brianna sat down on one of the hard plastic chairs in the waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights above flickering intermittently. Her back still ached, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness she felt in her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself. The pain, both physical and emotional, was overwhelming, but she couldn't let herself break. Her fingers twitched in her lap, and she resisted the urge to check her phone again. There was nothing more to see. Not yet. She had reached out to a lawyer, but they hadn't gotten back to her. The only thing she had now was time. And time, as she knew all too well, had a way of stretching when you didn't want it to. She could hear voices from across the room, two nurses talking quietly behind the counter. Brianna didn't try to hide her curiosity, her attention drawn to the conversation. She could only make out a few words at first, but then one of them spoke louder, almost as if she wanted Brianna to hear. "I swear, these people think they can just walk in and demand everything," one of the nurses said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If they weren't so lazy, maybe they wouldn't end up here in the first place." Brianna's chest tightened at the words, the sharpness of the judgment cutting deeper than she expected. She had heard these kinds of things before, whispers behind closed doors, the subtle racial undertones that followed her wherever she went. But hearing it out loud, in a place where she had come to seek help, felt different. It felt like a slap across her face. The second nurse laughed lightly, her voice high and mocking. "Yeah, they always have some excuse, don't they? Like that's going to change anything. Just tell them to wait. They always do." Brianna clenched her jaw, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. She wanted to stand up and scream at them, to call them out for the things they were saying. But the truth was, she had learned a long time ago that raising her voice in situations like this only made things worse. So she sat in silence, the rage bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. The nurses continued to talk, their words fading into the background as Brianna tried to steady her breathing. She closed her eyes again, imagining herself somewhere else, anywhere else, away from this place, away from the subtle cruelty, the hidden prejudice that seemed to be ingrained in every corner of society. "Are you all right?" The voice broke her out of her thoughts, and she opened her eyes to find the woman from the corner of the waiting room standing beside her. The woman's face was drawn, tired, but there was a calmness about her that Brianna couldn't help but envy. She hadn't expected to see her again. I'm fine," Brianna replied quickly, though she knew it was a lie. She wasn't fine. She wasn't anywhere near fine. But the woman didn't seem to care about her answer. Instead, she sat down beside Brianna, her movements slow and deliberate. "They've been doing that for years," the woman said, her voice low, "talking like that about us. Like we're invisible, not even worth their time." Brianna nodded, the lump in her throat growing again. "It's not just here," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "It's everywhere. It's like they don't even see me. Like I'm just not real." The woman studied her for a moment, her eyes softening. "I know. I've been there. It's exhausting, but you have to keep pushing back. You can't let them win." Brianna looked at her, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "And how do you do that? How do you keep pushing when every door you knock on slams in your face?" The woman's face hardened for a moment, as though remembering something painful. "You find another door. You go around them if you have to. There's always a way. It's just about not giving up." Brianna thought about her own fight. She had already reached out to a lawyer, sent a formal complaint to the hospital, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just document the injustice. She had to make sure they felt it. She had to make them regret what they had done. But what if no one cared? What if her voice, her pain, was just another whisper in the wind, fading into nothing? The woman beside her must have sensed the doubt creeping into Brianna's mind because she placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this. There are more people than you think who will stand with you, but you have to take the first step." Brianna's heart raced at the thought. She didn't know if she was ready for what lay ahead, but something inside her stirred, a spark of hope, a flicker of determination. Maybe this wasn't the end of her fight. Maybe it was just the beginning. "Thank you," Brianna said softly, her voice full of gratitude. She wasn't sure what had changed, but the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter, as if the woman's words had given her just enough strength to carry on. The woman nodded, her face softening into a small smile. "You're welcome. Now, let's make sure they can't ignore you anymore." Brianna inhaled deeply, the anger still burning in her chest, but now it felt like something she could use, something she could direct towards something real. She stood up, feeling a bit more grounded. The world wasn't going to change overnight, but she wasn't going to let this moment slip away either. The hospital lobby had grown more crowded as the day wore on, the steady hum of quiet conversations and the occasional rustle of paper filling the space. Brianna sat on the same chair as before, trying to steady her breathing. The anger that had simmered within her all morning had only intensified, and the oppressive silence of the room was starting to feel suffocating. She couldn't take it anymore. Not the waiting, not the looks, not the feeling of being invisible. Her back still ached, the sharp pangs reminding her that she was in real pain. But the emotional toll of being dismissed without a second thought had become unbearable. She looked at her phone again, the screen blinking to life in her hand. Nothing from the lawyer, nothing from anyone else. Her eyes flickered back to the receptionist's desk, where the same woman, the one who had refused her service earlier, was typing away, seemingly oblivious of the world around her. Brianna could feel the heat rising in her chest as the image of the receptionist's indifferent face from earlier flashed in her mind. She was done being quiet. With a sharp breath, Brianna stood up and walked toward the desk. The room seemed to fall silent around her, and for a moment, she wondered if anyone had noticed a change in her demeanor. The receptionist who had been talking earlier paused her conversation, and even the nurses at the counter seemed to sense the shift. But Brianna didn't care. She wasn't going to let this go any longer. When she reached the desk, she didn't wait for the receptionist to look up. She spoke before the woman even had a chance to finish typing. "I need to speak with someone in charge." The receptionist didn't even flinch, her eyes remaining fixed on her screen. "I told you, we're not taking walk-ins right now. You need to go." "No," Brianna interrupted, her voice steady but fierce. "You told me that already. You told me to go somewhere else. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving until I'm seen. I'm in pain. You can't just ignore me because I'm black." The receptionist's fingers stopped typing, and she slowly lifted her gaze to meet Brianna's eyes. There was no apology in her expression, no remorse, just the same cold, detached look she had given her before. "Excuse me." The receptionist's tone was flat, dismissive. "You heard me," Brianna said, her voice gaining strength. "I've been sitting here for hours, and I've watched you ignore me. I've watched you dismiss me like I don't matter, like I don't deserve help. You don't get to treat me this way just because of the color of my skin." The receptionist narrowed her eyes. A brief flash of irritation crossed her face before she turned her attention back to the computer. "You don't need to get so worked up. We'll get to you when we get to you. Now, go sit down and wait like everyone else." The words landed like a slap. Brianna's heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't about to back down. Not this time. "I'm not sitting down," she said, her voice sharp. "I want to speak to your supervisor. Now." The receptionist sighed, clearly irritated. "Fine, but you're wasting your time." She picked up the phone and dialed a number, speaking in an exasperated tone. "We've got another one of those complaints out here. You know the drill." Brianna clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream at the receptionist, to demand an explanation for her behavior, but she knew that wouldn't get her anywhere. She could already feel the weight of the stares from the people around her, the quiet judgment in their eyes, the way they looked away when she met their gaze. She was used to it, but today she wasn't going to let them silence her. Moments later, a man in a suit walked into the lobby, his presence commanding attention. He was in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a calm, authoritative demeanor. Brianna assumed he was a supervisor. He walked toward the receptionist, who immediately began speaking in a hushed tone, pointing in Brianna's direction. The supervisor's eyes flicked over to Brianna, and he gave her a polite but distant smile. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth, professional. Brianna didn't hesitate. "I've been sitting here for hours, trying to get help, and I've been completely ignored. I was told to leave, to go somewhere else. All because I'm black. I don't want to be treated like this anymore. The supervisor's smile faltered, but it didn't disappear. He looked at her for a moment, then glanced back at the receptionist. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding here, he said, his voice almost too calm. I'll make sure you're taken care of right away. Please, let's take a seat and we'll get things sorted out. Brianna stood her ground. No, I'm not sitting down anymore. I want action, not empty words. I want this to be taken seriously. I want a full investigation into how I've been treated here today. The supervisor's gaze shifted again, this time lingering a little longer. Brianna could feel the tension building between them, thick in the air. He was calculating, trying to figure out how to deal with the situation without causing too much disruption. I understand your frustration, he said carefully, his voice taking on a more conciliatory tone. But there's no need to escalate things. Let's just get you the care you need. Brianna's anger flared. You don't get to decide when I'm allowed to be frustrated. You don't get to dismiss my pain because it's inconvenient for you. You don't get to tell me how to feel. You need to address this now, or I will take this further. For a moment, the supervisor said nothing. His face was unreadable, but Brianna saw the shift. He wasn't quite as certain anymore. His polite smile faltered for a second, revealing a crack in the armor he had carefully crafted. Finally, he nodded, his tone shifting. I'll get the proper forms for you to file a formal complaint. But this doesn't need to go any further. You'll get the care you need. Brianna nodded slowly, her eyes locked on his. Thank you. But as she turned away, she knew this was only the beginning. She wasn't going to stop until the people who had tried to silence her were held accountable. She was done letting them treat her like she didn't matter. And now she had a plan. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and late-night research. Brianna couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, all she could think about was the dismissal, the indifference, the way her pain had been so easily disregarded, the sense of injustice that burned through her every time she replayed that moment in her mind. But as the hours passed, she started to feel something else too, a surge of determination that kept her going. She wasn't going to let this be another story of someone being ignored. This time, things would be different. Her phone rang late one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but Brianna answered anyway. Hello, Brianna? She froze for a moment. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but it didn't take long for her to realize who it was. This is David Green, the attorney you spoke with earlier. I've had a chance to look over your complaint, and I think we have grounds for a case. But I need your help in gathering some evidence. It's going to take more than just your word for it. I need you to document every interaction, every person who has witnessed any kind of discrimination. Brianna sat up straighter. What do I need to do? David explained the steps she needed to take, outlining exactly what he would need to build a strong case against the hospital. He told her to keep a detailed journal of everything that happened from here on out, to write down her feelings, her thoughts, and any conversation she overheard. He also advised her to document the exact words of everyone who had played a role in her treatment. You don't have to do this alone, he said, his voice firm but reassuring. But you have to be thorough. After the call ended, Brianna spent the next few hours going over every piece of information she had. She dug through her medical records, reviewed the emails she had sent, and began writing down every moment she could remember from the day she'd walked into the emergency room. It was exhausting, but it also made her feel like she was gaining some control over the situation. The more she dug, the more she realized how much systemic racism had permeated the entire process. There were subtle things, little comments, looks exchanged between hospital staff, things she hadn't noticed in the moment. It was like a fog lifting, and for the first time, Brianna could see how deeply embedded the bias was in the institution. She even found a few online forums where people shared similar experiences, stories of discrimination and mistreatment in healthcare. It was heart-wrenching to read, but it gave her the strength to continue. She wasn't alone. She wasn't the only one who had been pushed to the margins, made to feel like her life didn't matter. As the days passed, Brianna felt the weight of the case growing heavier. The pressure was mounting, but so was her resolve. She knew the road ahead would be long. It wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about showing that the system had failed countless others before her and that it needed a change. One evening, as Brianna sat at her kitchen table, her pen hovering over the paper, she received another call. This time, it was from the hospital. "Ms. Walker," a calm voice said, "we received your complaint, and we'd like to invite you to a meeting to discuss the matter further. Please let us know when you'll be available." Brianna's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. She took a deep breath before responding. "I'm available anytime. But just so you're aware, I've already contacted my attorney, and I'm prepared to take legal action if necessary." There was a brief pause on the other end, but the voice remained polite. "Of course, Ms. Walker. We'll be in touch to schedule the meeting." As Brianna hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. The meeting would be a crucial step, but it wasn't going to be easy. The hospital would try to downplay her experience, to make it seem like it was just a misunderstanding. But Brianna was done being dismissed. She had her evidence, and now she had the legal backing to back it up. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not now. Not ever. The meeting with the hospital's administration was set for the following Wednesday afternoon. Brianna spent the days leading up to obsessing over every detail. She read and reread the notes she had taken, reviewed the legal documents, and practiced what she would say. But nothing could ease a knot of anxiety in her stomach. It wasn't just a meeting. It was her opportunity to stand up, to make her voice heard in a room that had been designed to silence her. She arrived early, walking through the glass doors of the hospital with her head held high. The lobby was quiet, and as she checked in with the receptionist, the woman behind the desk didn't even glance up. Brianna took a seat in the waiting area, her legs jittering nervously. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes that crossed her, the disapproving glances that followed her into the building. She sat back, trying to focus on her breathing, but her thoughts kept running in circles. What if they dismissed her again? What if they told her she was overreacting? She had no idea what to expect. The world she was about to walk into felt foreign to her, an institutional space designed to protect those with power, not people like her. It was a system built to dismiss the concerns of the vulnerable, and Brianna knew that she had to fight for every inch of ground. After what felt like an eternity, a woman in a sharp suit appeared in front of her. She was tall, confident, and exuded the polished air of someone who had made it through the ranks of corporate America. Brianna's gut told her this was someone who would try to dismiss her, someone who would smile with a polite, practiced indifference. But she stood up anyway, meeting the woman's eyes with an unwavering gaze. "Ms. Walker," the woman said, extending her hand with a smile. "I'm Margaret Banks, the hospital's legal advisor. Please follow me." Brianna shook her hand but didn't smile. There was no room for pleasantries now. As they walked down a long corridor, Brianna tried to steady her thoughts. She couldn't let herself back down. Not for anyone. Not for them. They entered a small conference room, and Brianna took a seat across from 3 men and another woman, all dressed in suits. The woman, Margaret, took the lead, and they all nodded at Brianna as if they were trying to be polite. But she saw through the facade. They were trying to make her feel small, to remind her that she was outnumbered. "I assume you know why we're here, Ms. Walker," Margaret said, her voice smooth, calculated. "We've received your complaint, and we're here to discuss your concerns. I want to assure you that we take these matters seriously." Brianna didn't flinch. "I don't believe that," she said quietly, her voice firm. "If you took these matters seriously, I wouldn't be sitting here, talking to you. I'd be receiving the care I needed that day. I'd be treated with the dignity and respect I deserve." The room grew quiet. Margaret's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "We understand that emotions were high on the day you came in, Ms. Walker." One of the men spoke, his voice patronizing. "But this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. You have to understand, the hospital staff is under a lot of pressure, and things can get miscommunicated." Brianna's blood began to boil. A misunderstanding? That was the excuse they were using? The same excuse they used to disregard her pain? The same excuse that allowed them to keep people like her out of the system? "No," Brianna said, her voice rising. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial discrimination. I've been turned away by this hospital. I've been treated like my life doesn't matter. Don't try to downplay what happened. The room shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. Margaret looked at the others, then back at Brianna. Her expression unreadable. You have no evidence of racial discrimination, Ms. Walker, Margaret said, her tone colder now. You were treated according to the hospital's protocols, and we don't see anything that would indicate bias. Brianna clenched her fists on the table, her nails biting into her palms. The words were like a slap in the face. They were trying to gaslight her, to make her feel like she was imagining things, like she was overreacting. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I have evidence, Brianna said, leaning forward. I've been recording everything. The conversations, the reactions, the people who've witnessed this. I have proof of the way I was treated here. I've been in touch with a lawyer, and I'm prepared to take legal action. The room fell silent, and for the first time, Brianna saw the shift in their faces. The veneer of politeness began to crack, and she could feel their discomfort, their unease. The power dynamic had shifted. They weren't so sure of themselves anymore. Margaret cleared her throat. That's quite an accusation, Ms. Walker, she said, trying to maintain her composure. But we still don't see any grounds for such a claim. We'll need time to review the matter. I don't need time, Brianna snapped, her voice sharper now. I've been waiting for years. And if you're not willing to take this seriously, I'll take it to the press. I'll make sure the whole world knows how your hospital treats people like me. The words hung in the air, heavy with a promise. Brianna could see the shift in their eyes now. She had their attention. The meeting stretched on for another hour, but Brianna knew there was nothing they could say to change her mind. They would try to stall. They would try to sweep this under the rug, as they always did. But she wasn't going to let them. As she left the conference room, the weight of the conversation still pressing on her, Brianna felt something shift inside of her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been denied what was rightfully theirs. And this fight was far from over. The next few days after the meeting with the hospital felt like a blur of anxious anticipation. Brianna couldn't stop replaying the conversation in her mind. The way they had tried to dismiss her, the cold, calculating way they had attempted to downplay her pain. It angered her, yes, but it also wore her down, leaving her feeling hollow, as though the battle was starting to take a physical toll. There was a growing sense of exhaustion that she couldn't shake. The emotional drain, the constant pressure dealing with a system that refused to see her, was becoming overwhelming. Every conversation, every moment of silence she had to endure, seemed to eat away at her resilience. One evening, after another long day of fighting the mental exhaustion, Brianna found herself sitting alone in her apartment. The quiet only broken by the hum of the refrigerator. She had already eaten, already read through the documents again, already written down the latest details of her case. But her mind wouldn't stop. She couldn't focus on anything. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from David Green, her attorney. Let me know if you need anything. You're doing the right thing, Brianna. Don't forget that. You're not alone. The words were comforting, but they didn't quite take away the heaviness she felt. She was doing the right thing, but that didn't make the process any easier. The longer this dragged on, the more she questioned herself. Was she being too harsh? Were they right? Was this just the price of standing up for herself? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Hello? Brianna? It was David. His voice was softer than usual, more personal. How are you holding up? He asked, and the question immediately hit Brianna harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. She was so used to being the strong one, the one who didn't show weakness, the one who powered through the emotional turmoil. But in that moment, it all came crashing down. She sniffed, trying to hide the sudden wave of emotion. I'm fine. Just tired. Everything is moving so slowly, and I'm losing myself in this fight. David's voice softened. You don't have to keep it all together for me. Brianna, I know this is hard, and I know it's taking a toll on you. I want to make sure you're okay. 2, you're allowed to feel everything you're feeling. You're allowed to be vulnerable. Brianna sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of those words sinking into her. She had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable in front of anyone, much less a lawyer who was supposed to be on her side. She didn't want to be seen as weak. She didn't want to admit how deeply this was affecting her. But in that moment, David's understanding gave her permission to acknowledge the raw truth that had been hidden under her facade. "I'm just so tired of being dismissed," Brianna said, her voice breaking. "It's like I'm invisible to them. I do everything right. I speak up. I do everything they say, but it's still not enough. They still treat me like I don't matter." David's voice was full of empathy now, like he had been waiting for her to say those words. "You matter, Brianna. You matter more than you know. What you're doing right now is bigger than you, and you don't have to carry all that weight alone. I'm here for you every step of the way." A tear slipped down Brianna's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel it, to feel the hurt she had buried under layers of strength and defiance. The pressure, the exhaustion, the constant emotional toll. It was too much to carry on her own. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." David was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "You're doing something brave, Brianna. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who's been silenced, ignored, and pushed aside. And even though it feels like this battle is never ending, you're making a difference. Don't forget that." Brianna took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure the emotions had completely settled, but something inside of her shifted. She wasn't alone in this fight, and she didn't have to carry the weight of it all by herself. She had people who believed in her, people who were ready to stand with her. The conversation with David lasted a few more minutes, but by the end, Brianna felt a sense of clarity she hadn't had in days. She wasn't done. She wouldn't be broken. As she hung up, Brianna stood up from the couch, wiping her eyes. She looked around her apartment, the walls, the quiet, the solitude, and felt a new sense of resolve. There was still so much more to do. She still had a long road ahead of her. But now, at least for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she was carrying. She allowed herself to be vulnerable so she could move forward with renewed strength. And no matter how hard it got, no matter how many times they tried to push her down, she would keep going. She would keep fighting. The next few weeks felt like an endless cycle of waiting. Brianna had submitted her complaint, gathered evidence, met with the hospital administrators, and even spoken to the press. Yet, everything seemed to stall. The days blurred together with little to show for her efforts other than an increasing sense of frustration. The more she pushed, the more resistance she met, first from the hospital, then from the legal system, and finally from a society that seemed to be constantly telling her to stay silent. But then something shifted. One afternoon, Brianna received an email notification from an unfamiliar name. Kara Johnson, reporter, News 8 investigative team. She clicked on it, her heart pounding in anticipation. "Hello, Brianna. I'm a reporter with News 8, and I've been following your case closely. I've spoken to a few sources who are familiar with the hospital's past record on racial discrimination, and I'd love to meet with you to discuss your experience further. We're planning an investigative piece that could expose the hospital's failures and help people like you get the justice they deserve. Please let me know if you're available for an interview." Brianna sat back, the weight of the message settling over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Someone was finally listening. Someone with real power. She quickly typed back, agreeing to meet the next day. The phone call came soon after, and Kara's voice was warm, professional, but urgent. "We'll take it from here," she said. "I want to give you the platform to tell your story, and I believe this will make a huge impact. But we need to act quickly. Can you meet tomorrow afternoon?" Brianna's pulse quickened as she agreed. She hung up the phone with a strange mix of relief and anxiety. This was her chance. This could be the turning point, the moment when things finally started to move in her favor. But she had learned enough by now to know that the battle was far from over. The next afternoon, Brianna met Kara at a small cafe in downtown. Kara was in her early 30s, with sharp gaze and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put Brianna at ease. They sat down in a quiet corner booth, away from the hustle and bustle of the cafe. Brianna could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her as Kara set up a recorder on the table between them. "I've been following your story, Brianna," Kara said, her voice gentle but firm. "And I have to say it's heartbreaking. But the more I've learned about what happened to you, the more I see just how much this is a part of a larger issue. This is about systemic discrimination that's been happening for far too long." Brianna nodded, her throat tight. "That's exactly it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just me. It's all the people they've ignored over the years. I couldn't stand by anymore. I had to say something." Kara smiled, a small gesture of encouragement. "And now, your story is going to reach a lot more people. We're going to make sure they hear you." Brianna took a deep breath, the enormity of what she was about to do hitting her all at once. But this was it. She couldn't turn back now. Kara leaned forward slightly. "So, tell me what happened from the very beginning." Brianna's voice wavered at first, but as she began recounting the days she had walked into the emergency room, feeling sick, vulnerable, and dismissed, her words gained strength. She spoke about the receptionist's cold indifference, the mocking comments from the nurses, and the way the supervisor had downplayed her accusations. The more she spoke, the more she realized just how far-reaching this went. It wasn't just the actions of a few individuals. It was a pattern, a culture of racism that permeated the system. As she told her story, Kara took notes, her eyes never leaving Brianna's face. The recorder clicked in the background, capturing every word, every detail. The moment felt surreal to Brianna. She was telling her truth to someone who truly seemed to care, who wasn't trying to shut her down or belittle her. After Brianna finished, Kara sat back, nodding thoughtfully. "What you've experienced is not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger, systemic problem in healthcare, and I believe this can make a difference. But we need more. We need more people to come forward. We need a wider picture of the problem." Brianna's stomach sank slightly. "More people?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "What do you mean?" Kara's expression softened. "I mean, we need to show that this isn't just about one hospital. We need to bring together other people who've experienced the same thing. The more voices we have, the stronger the story will be." Brianna nodded slowly, realizing that this was bigger than she had imagined. The fight had never been just about her. It had always been about everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had suffered in the shadows. She couldn't carry this alone anymore. "I'll help," Brianna said, her voice steady. "I'll find them. I'll find others who've been through this." Kara smiled, her eyes glinting with appreciation. "I knew you would. And when this goes public, it'll send a message. It won't just be a story about one woman's fight. It'll be a statement about what we all need to change." Over the next few weeks, Brianna worked closely with Kara, connecting with others who had faced similar discrimination at the same hospital. It wasn't easy to convince people to come forward. Many were still scared of retaliation, afraid of what would happen if they spoke out. But one by one, Brianna managed to gather a group of survivors, each with their own story to tell. Together, they made a powerful statement, a collective voice that could no longer be ignored. Kara's investigative team worked tirelessly, digging deeper into the hospital's history, uncovering evidence of racial bias that had been going on for years. The hospital tried to push back, issuing press releases and denying the accusations, but it was too late. The story ran on News 8 3 weeks later. It was everything Brianna had hoped for and more, an expose that detailed the pervasive racial discrimination at the hospital, backed up by first-hand accounts from patients, employees, and experts. The broadcast reached millions, sparking outrage and widespread discussion. Brianna's name became known, not as a victim, but as a voice for change, for accountability. The hospital's leadership was forced to issue a public apology, and investigations into the claims of racial discrimination were launched. The receptionist who had ignored Brianna, along with other staff members, was placed on administrative leave, and the hospital was required to implement new training programs aimed at combating racial bias. But for Brianna, the victory wasn't just in the public backlash. It was in the knowledge that she had done something to expose the truth, something that would create ripples for years to come. She had fought, and won, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been overlooked, ignored, and silenced. And while the fight wasn't over, it had shifted in her favor. The battle for justice was always going to be long, but now, Brianna knew she wasn't fighting alone. The morning after the expose aired, Brianna woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just another barrage of press calls or messages from people who didn't understand the fight she'd been through. But after a few moments, she reached for her phone, her heart pounding in her chest as she saw the hundreds of notifications flooding her screen. Messages from reporters, calls from family and friends, a flood of new followers on her social media accounts, all of them reaching out, either in support or to offer their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of the same hospital. Brianna's head spun as she scrolled through the messages, her mind racing with the weight of everything that had happened. The story had gone viral in ways she hadn't anticipated, pushing the issue of racial discrimination in healthcare to the forefront of public discourse. Her eyes skimmed through the headlines. Outrage grows over racial discrimination in local hospital. Survivor speaks out, how one woman's fight exposed a system of bias. Hospital faces scrutiny after News 8 investigative report. But despite the mounting attention, Brianna couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. She had expected backlash from the hospital, but the reality of it felt heavier than she could have anticipated. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from David Green. "Brianna, are you okay?" David's voice was full of concern, and she could hear the exhaustion in his tone. "I know this is overwhelming, but you need to stay focused. We got a long road ahead." "I'm fine," she replied, her voice wavering slightly. "It's just so much. I didn't expect everything to blow up like this. It feels like the world is watching, and I don't know if I'm ready for that." David was quiet for a moment before responding. "You've been ready for this your entire life, Brianna. You've been carrying this weight for so long, and now people are finally hearing you. The hospital is on the defensive. They're going to try to discredit you, downplay everything, but you have to hold your ground. They can't intimidate you anymore." Brianna nodded, though David couldn't see her. She felt the weight of his words, but the uncertainty in her gut was hard to shake. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all the people who had been treated the same way she had, who had faced the same kind of institutional indifference. The next few days were a whirlwind. The hospital issued a public statement, one that was carefully crafted to deflect responsibility. They claimed the investigation into Brianna's complaint was ongoing, that they were taking the allegation seriously. But Brianna could see through the veneer of their words. The response felt rehearsed, designed to protect their image rather than address the systemic issues that were clearly laid out in the investigative report. There were protests outside the hospital, small but growing every day. People with signs calling for justice, demanding accountability. Some were former patients. Others were healthcare workers who had witnessed the same discrimination, and still others were strangers who had heard Brianna's story and were moved to act. Brianna stood outside the hospital one afternoon, surrounded by the chanting crowd, and she felt a rush of solidarity. People had heard her, had seen the truth, and they were standing beside her. But as the protests grew, so did the pressure from the hospital. Brianna received a call from an unknown number late one evening. When she answered, a calm voice spoke. "Ms. Walker," it said, "this is Robert Simmons from the hospital's legal department. We understand the attention your case has garnered, and we would like to offer you a settlement to resolve the matter out of court. We believe this is the best course of action for all parties involved." Brianna's blood ran cold. The offer was an obvious attempt to silence her. It was a typical move, an offer of money in exchange for her silence, for her compliance. But Brianna had learned enough in the past few weeks to recognize the manipulation. She gripped the phone tightly, her knuckles white. "I'm not interested in a settlement. I want justice. I want real change, not a quick fix to make you look good." Robert's voice remained calm, unshaken. "You understand that go to court will be costly, both financially and emotionally. This will drag on for years. It's not too late to reconsider. We can resolve this quickly. Think about it." "I've thought about it," Brianna snapped, her voice firm. "And I'm not backing down." She hung up the phone, her heart racing. The weight of the decision she had made settled over her again. The fight wasn't just about what was right. It was about everything she had lost, everything she had endured just to get to this point. She wasn't about to let them buy her silence. The next day, the media coverage intensified. The protests outside the hospital grew, and the pressure was mounting. Brianna spoke at a press conference, standing tall in front of the cameras. Her voice was steady, despite the turmoil inside her. "We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for accountability," she said, her words ringing out in the quiet space. "This isn't just about one hospital. This is about a system that continues to fail people of color. We will not be silenced." Her words were met with applause from the gathered crowd, but the reality of what was coming next loomed over her. The hospital would fight back harder now. They would pull every legal trick in the book to discredit her, to make her doubt herself. But she couldn't back down. Over the following weeks, the legal battle raged on. Brianna found herself in court, standing before a judge, her lawyer by her side, as the hospital's attorneys tried to undermine her case. They called her into depositions, questioning her every move, trying to make her seem irrational, emotional, and unstable. But Brianna refused to give in. She had come too far. And as the case progressed, Brianna saw something unexpected happening. People were listening. More victims came forward. The support for her grew louder. The hospital's defensive walls began to crack, and the truth was finally coming to light. Eventually, the hospital reached a settlement that included both financial compensation for Brianna and a commitment to overhauling their racial discrimination policies. The leaders involved in her mistreatment were forced to resign, and the hospital promised to implement new diversity and inclusion training. Brianna felt a quiet triumph, but it wasn't the money or the settlement that mattered to her. It was the fact that the system had finally been forced to acknowledge its own failure. But even with the victory, Brianna knew that this wasn't the end. The emotional cost was high, the scars deep, yet she had endured, and she had fought for a better future, for herself, for others like her, for all those who would come after. As she left the courtroom for the last time, Brianna walked out with her head held high. She had made them regret it. She had made them listen. The victory was bittersweet. Brianna sat in her apartment one evening, reflecting on everything that had transpired over the last few months. The court case had finally come to a close, and the hospital had been forced to accept responsibility for their actions. The public apology, the resignation of key staff members, the financial compensation, all of it felt like the right outcome. Yet, in the quiet moments, Brianna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than just what had been achieved in the courtroom. The weight of the emotional toll was heavier than anything the settlement could have compensated for. The trauma, the sleepless nights, the constant tension, it had all taken its toll on her mental and emotional health. And though she had been praised for her courage, Brianna couldn't help but feel a deep sense of exhaustion. She picked up her phone and scrolled through the social media messages that had accumulated since the settlement was announced. Support, congratulations, people expressing admiration. It was overwhelming. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had crept in alongside the applause. The battle had been won, but she still felt like there was something missing. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood up, surprised, as she wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, she found David standing there, looking as exhausted as she felt, but with a soft smile on his face. "Hey," he said gently. "Mind if I come in?" Brianna stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They both sat on the couch, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. "I've been thinking about what you said during the press conference," David started, breaking the silence. "That this fight wasn't just about one hospital. It was about a system that's failing so many people." Brianna nodded, her throat tightening. "I meant it. This wasn't just about me. It never was. But somehow, it's still hard to make sense of it all. I thought when the settlement came, I'd feel different, like I'd have this sense of relief, of justice. But instead, I just feel empty." David's expression softened. "You're allowed to feel that way. It's a huge emotional toll to put yourself out there like that, to expose all of it for the world to see. But what you did, it was bigger than any case or settlement. You gave people a voice. and you made them listen. I don't know, Brianna whispered, her voice cracking slightly. I thought I'd feel whole again, but I still feel like there's more to be done, like the fight isn't really over. David leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. It's not over. Not for you, and not for the people who are still going through this. But what you've done is set the stage for real change. You've started a conversation that needed to happen, and now people are listening. You didn't just win for yourself. You won for everyone who has been silenced. And that's something to be proud of. Brianna wiped away a stray tear that had escaped. I didn't do it alone, she said softly. There were so many others, too many to count, who came forward after me. I couldn't have done it without them. David smiled. Exactly. This wasn't just your fight. It was a collective one. And now, you're a part of something much bigger than just this case. Brianna exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling into her chest. She knew he was right. What she had done was important, not just for her own healing, but for the many others who had experienced the same kind of injustice. But even with the settlement, the work wasn't finished. There were still so many more who needed their voices heard, so many more who were still suffering in silence. The emotional cost had been high, but it had been necessary. She couldn't take back what had happened, but she could use her experience to push for change, to ensure that this wasn't the last time people like her were heard. As the days passed, Brianna began to feel the stirrings of purpose returning. She still had a long way to go in her own healing, but now, more than ever, she knew her story was just one small part of the fight. She could use her platform to make sure this wasn't just another case that faded into the background. She would be a voice for those who were still being denied basic dignity and respect. She started working with advocacy groups, becoming more involved in the fight for racial justice in healthcare. Brianna wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader, someone who had the courage to speak out and make real change. She worked tirelessly, not for recognition or fame, but for the people who had been ignored for far too long. In the end, it wasn't the settlement or the apology that gave Brianna the peace she had been searching for. It was the realization that she had been part of something larger than herself. She had helped break the silence. And she would continue to fight for as long as it took to make sure no one else had to endure the same kind of mistreatment she had. Brianna stood on the balcony of her apartment one evening, looking out over the city. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold as the sun set behind the buildings, casting a warm glow over the world below. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a moment of peace, letting the quiet settle into her bones. It had been months since the case had ended, but it still felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. The fight wasn't over. She knew that. The system wasn't going to change overnight. But Brianna also knew that her part in it had made a difference. She had stood up, even when it seemed impossible, and her voice had been heard. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that hospital all those months ago, feeling invisible, dismissed. She had found her strength, her voice, and a new sense of purpose. And though the road ahead was still long, she knew she wasn't walking alone. As she turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kara, the journalist who had helped amplify her story. Just wanted to check in and say thanks again for everything you did. Your story is still inspiring so many. Don't forget that. Brianna smiled, knowing that Kara was right. She would never forget what she had accomplished, and she would keep pushing for change, no matter how long it took. Because, in the end, Brianna had learned one thing. True justice wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about ensuring that others never had to fight the same fight alone. And that, she realized, was where the real victory lay.